Imagine cities built for millions, standing utterly empty. In just 3 years, China used more concrete than the United States did in a century, and $10 trillion in homes now sit vacant. The property sector once powered 1/3 of China's entire economy. How did a building boom meant to secure the nation's future become a ghost economy threatening global markets? The answer begins where ambition and overbuilding collide. In 1998, China rewrote its housing rules. For the first time since the founding of the People's Republic, families could own and trade their homes. State planners saw a chance to transform the country's future, and city skylines began to change almost overnight. The countryside emptied as waves of rural workers packed their belongings and boarded trains. Over the next 2 decades, more than 260 million people left villages for city life, one of the largest human migrations in history. Urbanization became a national mission. With millions of new arrivals every year, demand for housing soared. Local governments, eager for growth, opened up land for development and encouraged construction at breakneck speed. Banks rolled out new mortgages and developers raced to meet the swelling demand. By the early 2000s, China was building around 15 million homes annually, more than the United States and Europe combined. Apartment towers, highways and shopping malls rose from farmland as city borders stretched outward. For a while it made sense. Every new arrival needed a place to live. Construction fueled jobs, boosted incomes and lifted millions out of poverty. Policymakers believed endless building was not just possible, but necessary. The alignment of government incentives, financial reforms and a vast migrating workforce set the stage for a building boom with no modern precedent. China's building boom left behind a footprint almost too vast to grasp. According to a Baidu satellite study, the country now holds 65 million vacant apartments, enough to house the entire population of France. Researchers mapped mobile phone activity and found city after city where new towers outnumbered the people living inside them. The numbers sound unreal until you look at places like Kangbashi in Inner Mongolia. Designed for over 1 million residents, Kangbashi's wide boulevards, glass office towers and shopping malls stretch for miles. Yet on most days the city feels silent. Actual population estimates range from just 9,000 to 30,000, leaving more than 90% of homes empty. Office buildings are lit but unoccupied, and luxury apartments sit in darkness night after night. Officials have tried to boost the numbers by relocating civil servants and offering subsidies, but satellite images and GPS data confirm the truth. Kangbashi remains mostly a city without people. This is not an isolated case. Across China, at least 24 ghost cities stand as monuments to overbuilding, their empty streets and vacant towers making the scale of the problem impossible to ignore. Pre-sales became the lifeblood of China's real estate giants. Developers sold apartments off-plan, collecting down payments and mortgage commitments long before breaking ground. By 2021, pre-sales accounted for 87% of all new home sales, turning future promises into immediate cash. This advance money was rarely set aside for building the homes buyers had paid for. Instead, it was funneled into new land purchases, interest payments, and even dividends, fueling a cycle that depended on ever-rising demand. The model worked as long as money kept flowing, but when sales slowed, the entire system began to unravel. Evergrande, once the world's most valuable property developer, amassed $300 billion in liabilities, more than the GDP of Finland. The company's relentless expansion relied on a constant stream of new pre-sale funds to cover old debts. When buyers lost confidence and stopped purchasing, Evergrande ran out of cash almost overnight. Projects stalled, workers went unpaid, and angry home buyers gathered outside company offices demanding answers. Country Garden, another giant, followed a similar path, with more than 3,000 projects and $190 billion in obligations. It dominated smaller cities and towns. As sales dropped and credit tightened, even minor missed payments set off alarm bells across global bond markets. The company defaulted on offshore bonds in August 2023, risking cross-defaults on $21 billion in bank loans. Both cases exposed how deeply the sector depended on a fragile loop, new money from pre-sales funding old promises. When that loop broke, the fallout rippled through banks, suppliers, and millions of ordinary families, revealing just how precarious the entire funding system had become. China's real estate boom drew strength from more than just bank loans and pre-sale deposits. In the shadows, a vast network of non-bank lenders quietly fueled the frenzy. Trust companies and wealth management products, sold to ordinary savers and small businesses, promised yields as high as 10%, returns far above what state banks offered. By 2021, this shadow banking system had swelled to an estimated $10 to $15 trillion, much of it tied directly to property. These funds bypassed official lending controls, flowing into risky projects that banks might have refused. When developers defaulted, millions of retail investors found their savings frozen, sparking protests outside trust company offices and online forums filled with anger and disbelief. The hunger for easy money wasn't limited to developers. Local governments created their own off-the-books borrowing machines called local government financing vehicles, known as LGFVs. These entities snapped up land, issued bonds, and borrowed from the same shadow banks that funded developers. For years it worked. Land sales made up as much as 60% of municipal revenue in some cities, paying for everything from subways to schools. But the system depended on ever-rising land prices. As the property market cooled, land sale revenues plunged by more than half, leaving cities with mountains of debt and shrinking options to pay it back. The risks stretched far beyond construction sites and empty towers. Shadow credit and land addiction exposed not just developers, but millions of households and entire city budgets to the fallout. The financial web-binding property, shadow banking, and local governments grew so tangled that no one could say for sure where the next default might strike. Over 50 major developers have defaulted on their debts since 2021. The total at risk now stands at around $1.3 trillion, an amount that dwarfs the annual budgets of many countries. As defaults piled up, state agencies scrambled to contain the fallout. Beijing launched multi-trillion yuan rescue facilities, offering emergency loans to keep half-finished towers from decaying and to prevent a wave of bankruptcies from overwhelming the banks. But these bailouts have limits. Local government financing vehicles, LGFVs, have been pressed into service, absorbing stalled projects and unfinished assets from failing developers. These vehicles were already burdened with debt, yet they now carry even more troubled property, often using fresh bailout funds to pay off old obligations instead of completing homes. The cycle of transferring risk from one pocket to another has slowed the collapse, but it has not solved the underlying problem. Mountains of bad debt remain, and the financial strain is spreading from developers to banks and city governments, threatening to pull more of the economy into the mire. Anger spilled into the streets as home buyers organised boycotts across more than 300 stalled projects. Families who had poured their savings into pre-sale contracts found themselves paying mortgages on apartments that would never be finished. Online forums and WeChat groups became rallying points, uniting thousands who refused to keep sending payments for empty promises. The movement spread quickly, drawing in young couples, retirees, and migrant workers alike. For many, these homes represented decades of sacrifice, now reduced to concrete shells and mounting debt. As prices tumbled by as much as 30% in major cities, the pain rippled outward. 70% of household wealth in China is tied up in property, and the sudden collapse wiped out the security of millions. People watched their life savings evaporate while the value of their homes fell below the balance on their mortgages. Consumer confidence plummeted and spending dried up, pulling the broader economy down with it. Policymakers now face an impossible choice. Let the market collapse and risk widespread unrest. Try to reinflate the bubble and deepen the misallocation, or attempt a slow, managed deflation, hoping to avoid a full-blown crisis. No path is painless, and the stakes stretch far beyond the empty towers and unfinished homes. Right now, over $5 trillion sits frozen in empty towers, capital that could reshape lives, but instead deepens risk across global markets. As China's property crisis unfolds, the world's economic balance hangs in the void. The true cost of misallocated ambition is still being written. What is your perspective?